So I'm looking at our guest website and it says on the homepage, most software sucks at hardware. It also claims to be the only program management tool built specifically for multi-team hardware development. Now, those are interesting claims. I'd love to find out more and figure out how they're driving revenue growth. But first, hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by Sproutwith.com. I'm Vinay Koshy, and our guest is John Conafay. Now, John, you're a US Air Force veteran and the CEO and co-founder of Integrate. I'm curious, what exactly was the problem that you saw when you first had this idea of starting what is now Integrate, and is the problem still the same as it is today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I've worked over the past decade for about 4 or 5 different space hardware companies specifically. First on the satellite side of things, then actually in a broker between satellites and rockets, and then on the rocket side. And I had this very unique position because I worked very early in almost all of these organizations where I saw the inflows of supply chain, the synthesis of all the data and parts and lead times and everything for the product roadmap and to our engineers, and then outflows to our customers. But that's the story we have now, which is very much true. But what we originally started with was what's called mission management software for coordinating putting multiple different satellites from multiple different companies onto a single launch vehicle. As you can imagine, a lot of requirements, an incredible amount of complexity, and you don't want customers to see each other's information. But I'll pause there. That's where we started and then expanded to all of hardware.
So you've worked at, I believe, three space unicorns previously, including working at the office of the CFO of NASA headquarters while at Bryce Tech and Director of Business Development and Spaceflight. It seems like quite an illustrious career. Why give it all up to go with a startup?
So this was always the goal. I've
Right.
always been fairly entrepreneurial. I think I don't know whether I should say this publicly, but pirated videos of some movie when I was in middle school were the first things that I sold, and then started a record label straight out of high school. Realized that I didn't have the discipline, capital, and education to really pursue this entrepreneurial path in a structured way that I would like to. So I joined the Air Force to get a swift kick in the rear. And when I got out, I've always been drawn to deeply entrepreneurial people and what it takes to actually build a world-class organization and company. Spire, I think I was part of an organization called Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. And we got to tour Bay Area and other area space startups specifically. And Spire Global, this was right when Spire Global and Planet Labs were just starting to build full constellations, which are large groups of satellites for one purpose that are size of bread loaves as opposed to school bus size satellites. And they were literally building them out of garages. Like my first job and internship was with Spire Global in an alley in Soma in San Francisco. Like the best I can describe it is a large garage with a lofted terrace internally. And they were building satellites for ship tracking. And I was just, when we toured the first time, I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I didn't realize that space companies could start in garages.
Mhm.
And that's because they largely hadn't before. So I was super, super drawn to that. And then rode what we call the new space wave of all of these very iterative, rapid development space companies that were enabled by the consumer electronics miniaturization. So think how powerful cell phones and various devices that you can hold in your hand are. The one of the most restrictive things about getting to space is the cost.
Mhm.
So being able to build super powerful, super tiny satellites enabled this whole new wealth of development, and I was super drawn to that. And so, long story short, went and or long story long, frankly, it went and worked directly for multiple founders and was the benefactor of a lot of really spectacular education from all of them. But they always knew that I wanted to start my own company. And when I found a problem that seemed so severe and so painful, then that I thought I could solve, that's how we started Integrate.
And thank you for sharing that. I'd love for you to expand on the problem as you saw it. What is all particularly unique to software with regard to hardware development?
The majority compliance is a huge issue in the space industry and the defense industries, as you can imagine, we don't want to leak any information on how to build rockets, which are very close to missiles. And then the high ground is space. So the ability to have that technology is very powerful. Compliance is huge in all of these deep tech and hardware industries. And compliant software doing what we can do at a base level doesn't exist unless it was built 30 years ago. First layer is that we have a really powerful, really beautiful, frankly, software that is compliant and for government use and defense use cases. But then going a step farther, like the actual piece that we were trying to solve before we became compliant and found a lot of utility in the government was all of the software that you have restricts you to the four walls of your organization. They say collaborative and they mean team collaborative between production and business development and all these things. But hardware necessitates collaboration external to your organization fundamentally, whether it's contract manufacturers, suppliers, vendors, that one company that has an 18-month lead time on that one part that you can't get anywhere else. And I found myself in this position at a lot of companies where I would be tracking all of these things in software when all I wanted to do was have our suppliers update it for us and have a connection to the outside world, and then be able to flow that through to our engineers and then eventually to our customers who we might be co-developing requirements with. And so that's what integrate allows you to do and was built with. You can break that fourth wall and parse out individual tasks, requirements, pieces of subassemblies of complex builds to external stakeholders to work on literally the exact same thing, as opposed to having to dissect or extract parts of a schedule to then send, which then means you don't really have a source of truth. You have pieces of sources of truth all over the place. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if I could, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but if I could put this in a slightly different way, it's almost like SAP system for hardware development.
Sits at more of a financial and higher
Yeah.
level, and I think works a lot for SAP or works a lot for hardware, but it's like a Microsoft project if you were able to truly collaborate with people inside and external to your organization, as opposed to having to send files back and forth.
Okay. And could you elaborate on the unique aspect of needing to collaborate on these hardware projects with external and internal parties?
Absolutely. So there are some parts of deep hardware builds that are so complex that there are a few experts in the world. So you have to outsource. An example is the turbo pump, which is still magic to me on rocket engines. There's one company out there that builds the vast majority of turbo pumps for rocket companies in the world. As you're contracting with that person, you have to develop requirements, taskings, milestones, all of these, and you have to share an incredible amount of data.
Mm-hmm.
But you only want to be able to share data for that piece and not the entire rocket. You want to be able
Right.
to just parse that piece out.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, with software, if you were to organize all of this in a spreadsheet, you could send them the entire spreadsheet and they would be able to see every piece of the rocket, every design decision you made, all of these things. What Integrate allows is if you were able to share one row or just a few cells of the spreadsheet for that particular contract manufacturer to work on. So you can get really granular and much more collaborative with what we're building.
Certainly. Just to give us a bit of an idea, when did Integrate launch?
Yeah. So we started about 2 years, a little over 2 years ago now
Right.
in 2022. So about June of 2022.
And I'm sure that your previous work experiences allowed you to get into a few doors within certain organizations. But I would also imagine that perhaps people would be perhaps a little bit reluctant to change existing processes and systems to accommodate something like Integrate or even try it out. How were you able to make inroads, and how have you grown to where you are today?
Yeah, the absolutely true. We initially thought our market was selling directly to program managers or technical program managers, but their entire job is to mitigate risk.
Hmm.
And us coming in and saying, "Hey, we want you to try out this new software for your 10-year program," is just saying, "Hey, please take on as much risk as humanly possible by interrupting your systems." So we've learned that starting with much smaller teams and smaller projects that are having a really painful time with what they're building or fitting into the greater organization, has been much more effective. We've had organizations say, hey, we're going to go present this to our entire 3,000 person engineering team. And we're like, please, for the love of God, stop. Do not do that. There's an autoimmune response in large organizations to change, and rightfully so. It's been a learning process and this wiggle back and forth of product market fit, of knowing where to enter that will be most effective and most least risky for our customers. Does that answer your question?
Who would you say has been the most open to this idea of incorporating integrate, if you were to pick a persona per se?
Yeah, we have a number of space companies on board currently, as well as the US Space Force. And going back to that compliant with great UX
Mhm.
UI, we found a really spectacular customer in the US government specifically, which was a little bit surprising to us, to be
Mhm.
completely honest. We thought we build this flashy, big, beautiful application and it's a surefire commercial play. But then we took a few big risks and got over our skis to put in the work to be compliant for government applications. And I think that's paid pretty spectacular dividends because a lot of organizations just fundamentally don't care or want to deal with that.
Mhm.
Yeah, going back to the very compliant defense applications and program managers within that.
Sure. And what would you say have been key milestones to your journey to date? Obviously, getting some headway with the government is a big one, but other milestones?
Yeah, I think the government is a huge, huge milestone. One of our first customers who we're just huge fans of because they just continuously give us spectacular feedback, Nanorax or Voyager, is probably one of our most exciting. They fly space missions, I think, every month to the International Space Station and beyond,
Yeah.
and they've just been a really helpful and spectacular customer so far.
Brilliant. You talked about an unselfish source of truth. Could you elaborate on that concept, especially in light of hardware development?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't really worked in an organization where the source of truth hasn't been giggled at a little bit because once you have to extract dates or details from a source of truth to give to someone else to then ingest at a later date whenever they're done doing whatever they need to it, it just doesn't mean a source of truth. Or then you have multiple sources of truth, which by definition, there can only be one source of truth. Yeah, our ability with Integrate to keep your source of truth and then just allow people into very specific parts of that source of truth means you can
Okay.
keep one place for everything and for everyone.
So, when you say that, in my mind, it conjures up the fact that perhaps some people are a little bit reticent to share certain bits of information or allow for data to go in and out, perhaps for security reasons, perhaps for more IP or other reasons that come to mind. But how are you, in terms of fostering this sense of collaboration and cooperation, able to win them over?
Yeah. We largely it's a moment that we ask them to sign up for an account while we're on the call, and
Mhm.
then we just show them what we're able to do because everybody conceptually thinks of collaboration as just oh cool, I can send some view only aspect to somebody else. I can do that in anything.
Mhm.
But when we show them our screen, we're like, okay, this is our 600,000 line item program, and let's say you're just working on our engine powertrain. So we're going to share that and the 60 associated tasks with you. Once we share it with them, it pops up instantly in their account and they're able to just contrast and compare and say, oh, we can't I get it now. We can't see any of the rest of the stuff. And then when we say, hey, now try to change something on the objects that I shared with you, and they go in and they see an approval pop up on our side of the screen, and they're like, wait a second, so we could literally just work on this directly with you collaboratively. No more like downloading spreadsheet or setting up a parallel instance of Jira or anything like this. And that really gets people going.
I would also imagine that security would be a bit of an issue, and things like NDAs and things. If you've got legal teams involved, they might be concerned about some of these aspects. How are those issues addressed?
Yeah, I think psychotic would be a kind word of saying how security focused we are. Trust is the absolute topmost goal and an assurance that we could possibly have with the system of this type. So our team knows it, and then showing our our customers all of the security measures for role based access control that we didn't necessarily have to put in, but built from the beginning really helps for people to feel secure in that. The fact that we build from AWS GovCloud from the ground up, the fact that we are on government environments, all of these things, and the way that we just talk about security and how important it is to us. The Our co-founder Paul's background, or head of engineering Bobby's background, than our incredible engineering team's background and the things that they've worked on, from finance applications to applications full of it's all in the way. It's actually about walking the walk, because I feel like people can smell BS from a mile away.
You talked about or mentioned that being compliant with government regulations was a big milestone, and getting their endorsement was key. I'm curious, how did you go about doing that? For most companies, working with the government can prove to be difficult, to say the least. How were you able to make inroads where so many people find it so tough?
Yeah, so we worked with a few people that really knew the government and knocked on a few doors and definitely opened some doors for us there, but also have worked with the government for the past 10 years in various capacities. So I have a pretty good understanding, and I'm a little less afraid. I'm also a veteran, so serving the government is important to me. And continuing that, I was definitely beating that drum in Silicon Valley before it was as popular as it is now, and got to be quiet about it more than once. And yeah, so a little help from our friends, of course, and then there are some services out there. We went with a service called Second Front Game Warden to get onto government environments, and they've walked us through the entire process, which has been a complete game changer for us, honestly.
Okay, you've got the government on your side. Are you completely bootstrapped, or have you sourced funding as yet?
Yeah, I would have loved to be. I absolutely adore our investors, and they've been incredible for us. I also strongly believe in bootstrapping as well. So we've raised pre-seed. We raised a pre-seed round in June of 2022, and then a seed round. Pre-seed was from Village Global, and then our seed round was Hyperplane, Riot, and Raveling Capital, and that was the last round we raised. Yeah.
It's been quite a journey to date. What do you see as the future for Integrate?
Yeah, I'm really excited about the amount of tailwinds that are going into defense manufacturing and this reindustrialized movement, because first of all, I believe in it. Second of all, I've lived it a good amount, and third, we're positioned very well to support it. As I said, being one of the only heavily compliant software suites built for hardware could be, the past year, but built period be in the past decade is a hell of a value proposition for a lot of our potential customers, and so really leaning into that is huge for us.
Mhm. And do you see applications just solely focused around the space industry, or do you see broader applications and branching
No,
out?
I love the space industry very much. It's obviously where I cut my
Mhm.
teeth and learned a lot about this, but it's such a wide, interesting world of really cool hardware out there. We're talking to automotive, to robotics, finding some really spectacular and clear cut use cases in aero and things like this. Everybody thinks, oh, if it's for space, that's so bespoke and so one off, that how could it be applied to all of these other things? And it's whether it's a shiny box on orbit or a shiny box on the ground here, they all run into the vast majority of the same problems and same systems and ways to be built. We're really excited to get even farther outside of the space industry, and hope to have a few things to announce here in the next few months.
I'd love to get your perspective on what it is to like with multiple parties, not just within your geographic area or within your industry, but others as well. Obviously, having communication is clear. Having communication, clear communication is important. Sorry, but and in terms of actually building the product, you can share what the product should be and have everyone on that page. I would imagine, though, that there's a lot more required of your ability to handle different perspectives, cultures, etc., and weave them into this common desire to see this outcome achieved as quickly as possible. Could you elaborate on your perspectives of what it takes to see these teams or project teams find success as opposed to end up in all sorts of strife?
When it comes down to it, if you're working at a company building one thing or many things, you're generally aligned on where you're going, and you joined that company for a specific reason. We don't haven't interacted with a lot of people in different organizations that are so diametrically opposed or so completely separate from each other. So getting to that single pain point or the single thread of, oh wow, you have that issue too. I thought you were an ops person and didn't understand what I was going through as an engineer, or you don't know what I'm going through as a production engineer on the line every day because you're a design engineer. Everybody's generally trying to solve the same problem, whether they call it something different or not. So getting really accurate in the stories that you tell or the commonalities that you see between organizations, between different teams within the same organization has been a huge challenge, but also really rewarding because that's how you get to those repeatable sells. If you're shooting right down the center and people are like, oh wait, yes, I know this story, I've lived this story, or I've lived this piece of the story or this piece of the story, and you can get everybody hanging onto the same train moving forward. Yeah, it's been super important and takes a lot of honing and a lot of listening more than anything.
Listening is key. I'm assuming that sharing some war stories that would allow to find common ground between your project partners is also key to building some sort of not just common ground but camaraderie. I would assume. Is there anything else that you would add as being key elements to successful project coordination?
Of course, we think collaboration and seamless, rapid, continuous integration and collaboration is super important. One of the things that I've seen really hurt is companies not being able to get into a flow where you have this kind of staccato rhythm of design reviews and of things happening at set times. And if you can't make a decision that's going to affect, or if you're making a decision that's going to affect 16 other systems and you have to wait 5 weeks or 3 weeks or even a week to translate that to the rest of the team or to whoever it's necessary to tell, as in with a lot of traditional hardware engineering and design, it's going to be much more painful to go back and fix that than if you're able to continuously communicate. So we get a lot of people that are like, okay, where are the reports that I can take to our monthly meeting? So they can, we'll get there, of course. But the idea is that everybody has access to exactly what they want and what they need to see continuously so that people can hop in. You hear about these really exquisite engineering organizations like Amazon, SpaceX, and things like this. They don't stop to review things necessarily. They're continuously communicating everything that's happening, and anybody can jump in and say, hey, flag on this because of this and this. And that's what we're trying to enable with integrate, really, is that continuous integration, deployment, and rapid iteration with hardware.
Communication is a wonderful thing and certainly helps people stay on the same page. I wonder if there is perhaps at times an issue with almost drowning in information. And if so, are there perhaps the evolution of AI ways in which you're incorporating means by which each user can streamline the amount of information they need and require in order to still be productive without getting overloaded or drowning in information?
Yeah, absolutely. That so our permissioning being at the object level as opposed to the account level. It's not like a lot of the program or project management software out there where everybody just sees everything all the time and you're just completely inundated by all of this because you can add people to only what you want them to see.
Okay.
But the way we have it set up in the application is only the engine and powertrain team can see this, and then any connections up the line that they need to see, as opposed to what the marketing team is doing necessarily, or
Mhm.
what finance is doing. You don't get everything all in one place. You can just focus on what your object affects, because of this very strict permissioning system in Integrate. And we've found that it reduces cognitive load for the majority of people, and allows a lot deeper level of focus.
Hmm. Now, you've had a, I guess, bit of an impact from Silicon Valley on your company. Would that be correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
How would you say it's affected the hardware development side of things?
How has Silicon Valley affected
Yeah.
hardware? Yeah, so I try as hard as I possibly can to not say agile in hardware development, because I think it's more just rapid development, rapid
Hmm.
iteration. I spoke to a bunch of people about this at a conference called Reindustrialize in Detroit recently, and every time somebody said agile, and I was like, "Do you mean Scrum? Do you mean all of this like software, like very strict software things that kind of drive me nuts?" And they're like, "Absolutely not. We just mean rapid iteration and rapid continuous innovation and all this." Was like, okay, cool. That absolutely makes sense. Like getting the definition of what they mean by agile, as opposed to not waterfall, not these gated
Yeah.
reviews everywhere. So I think that's huge, a huge effect that Silicon Valley and software development, the way it has evolved, has injected itself into hardware manufacturing specifically. You don't have this, again, I hate to invoke the almighty SpaceX, but you don't have this single set plan. It's all about fail forward, fail hard, make sure that you're iterating as fast as humanly possible. Because even if Starship doesn't make it to, or didn't make it to orbit to the fourth launch, they made
Mm.
four attempts in the amount of time that it takes, in a third of the time that it takes somebody to make one attempt.
So, if I understand this correctly, with this idea of iterating quickly, it's really driven by software. Would that be correct? Because your traditional old school way of producing parts and testing them out would have been hugely expensive and perhaps even quite for most companies even today.
Yeah, I think a lot of things. I think a lot of software practices were definitely borrowed, or have been borrowed, and are utilized. I think the advent of 3D printing. I hate to. I think we're past the fad phase of
Right.
3D printing. It's safe to say that 3D printing has given all these hardware companies a lot more flexibility to iterate quickly, be able to design something, see how it works immediately, as opposed to having to send out for production and then bring back in a way that maybe machining hasn't always allowed for, as it takes a little bit more time.
And listening to your growth journey to date, would I be right in saying that it's perhaps primarily been driven by compliance? Or would you say there are other factors to it?
Yeah, we knew the initial problem well, and we know the problem that we're solving now well. I think understanding the government and knowing that a lot of the same problems exist in commercial, but that the work that you have to do to get commercial customers is not necessarily going to be any harder than the work you have to do to get compliant for the government. Yeah, I think it could be safe to say that compliance is a huge part of what's driven our revenue, and we're a seed stage company, which feels like just above running a lemonade stand. So I don't want to say success outright. We've got a lot more to come, and a lot more
Mhm.
to prove, and a lot more to do, and a lot more to work towards. I hesitate to use the S word in any way, but I think the sight line is clearer because we've leaned so heavily into this compliance aspect.
Certainly. And as you perhaps branch out into, say, the automotive space and other fields, do you see yourself transitioning to perhaps more of a product led focus?
Yeah, we such how hard of a question that is because we definitely have been sales led to this point. We'll continue to be sales led because it's a complex sale. We're constantly striving, and our product team and engineers really value this, and have put so much work into building an application that doesn't take a manual or 6 months of training to get up and running for. So of course the want is there for product led. growth potential. We have put a fair amount of energy into that. Anybody can go sign up for the application right now, and then we have a pretty clean. I love our onboarding because it teaches you the peccadillos and intricacies of the application without going overboard. Something that I've been criticized a lot for is dual pathing things, because everybody's like, you'll run out of energy, and then anybody that's worked for me knows that there's plenty of energy to go around in this. We got told to stop trying to dual path commercial and government, but follow where product market fit actually is, and insisted that we continue with government and commercial, and it's both have helped each other. And the same with product led growth. It's a hard question, and I very strictly adhere to the adage that the only flat squirrel is one that couldn't make a choice. So this isn't necessarily a I don't want to make a choice, can't make a choice. I just want both running full steam and ahead.
Any uh, structural or organizational changes that need to be made in order to better adapt to perhaps more of a commercial take as you branch into these other fields or spaces?
Yeah, stay small. You see so many examples of companies slowing down substantially as they get larger, which just
Mhm.
seems so ass backwards. And but we've seen it ourselves. The more complexity you add to the machine, the harder it is to make decisions, the harder it is to move forward quickly. And we want to stay as disciplined and tight as a company as humanly possible. And even if we were to win a great big government contract or a great big commercial contract tomorrow, I think learning from the sins of our past in 2021 and the ZERP era is really valuable. So not getting ahead of us. A lot of beautiful office spaces out there that we absolutely don't need until they're default alive for 20 years. And so staying disciplined in that way is super important. It might not be the flashy answer. 2021 was only 3 years ago.
Yep, yep, certainly. Uh, as you think of a collaborative approach to hardware development, are there perhaps an aspect or two that you find doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
Every I think I'm going to answer a different question if that's okay. But I
Sure.
think I'm happy that defense work is getting the spotlight now. I think it's been so misunderstood for so long that defense means offense, which is not the case. Having a co-founder that did 4 tours, a father that did 3 tours in Vietnam, a grandfather that did was in World War I, you forget about the human aspect of defense and why we do a lot of the things that we do. And it's easy to point at it and say that warmongers or warhawks or something like this. And I'm very staunchly of the opinion that we want people that want peace in these positions, and injecting Silicon Valley's most recent vibe of not wanting war is a great thing for the defense industry fundamentally. I hope that wasn't too convoluted, but there's always a chance for things to dip over into toxic nationalism, as we've of course seen. But but I think it's really great that defense and what that means to people is being talked about now, not in a toxic, not in a destructive way.
Certainly. Okay. John, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Keep going. Just keep going and figure out how to keep going for as long as humanly possible. I think that's
Okay.
always my biggest takeaway.
Terrific. John, if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Yep. Integrate.co is our website. Go sign up for a trial, poke around, check it out, see what you think. We have a lot of different opinions about the website itself because it is definitely non-standard. So feel free to drop us a line and tell you love it or hate it. Yeah.
Is there a social media platform that you favor? Is it LinkedIn?
LinkedIn and Twitter. So X.com, my bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, LinkedIn we're active on, and X.com we have a bit of content on as well.
Okay. We'll include links to that in the show notes. John, this has been terrific. Thank you so much for doing this.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.